Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
What are you like, little? Sighed Christina, moderately young and insanely beautiful hair. The woman sat in her chair, nodding deftly at the 100 message in the large black phone. She cared little for her husband's indisposition, which he complained had been bothering her for the past hour. She didn't even look in his direction. I don't. I'm stuffy. Something's wrong. Maybe it's a virus. Everyone's sick now, and I'm out in public all the time. Don't make it up. You'll get over it. Christina answered indifferently. Stephen was a model husband and father. True, he had a child from his first marriage to Molly. They were very much in love with each other. They married at 18, but his wife died after giving birth. Since then, Stephen has been raising Christopher alone. His son met Christina at one of Christina's charity auctions a few years ago. She seemed so collected, reliable. Christina made no secret of the importance of her financial well-being. She was rational and sensible. Love is one thing, marriage is another. I'm not going to try to see if there's a heaven in a cauldron. I don't think a normal man would let his woman live in a hut, she said. Stephen did not agree with her. His beloved Molly was ready to live with him even on the street, even without a hut. Of course, quarrels on material grounds happened, but Molly would never leave him. He knew that for a fact. She believed that money came and went. Today it's there, tomorrow it may be gone. More important is the person who will always be there for you. Sometimes Stephen didn't understand why he'd chosen Christina. She was different. She wasn't his type. Yes, his friends were jealous of him. He could brag about Christina to business associates. His choice was approved by everyone but himself. Deep down, Stephen realized that he chose a completely unsuitable person, but he wanted to make sure that Christopher had a mother. Although Christina was hardly suitable for that role either, Christopher didn't recognize her as a mother. He called her by her first name and said his stepmother was cold and mean. No, I'll still call an ambulance, he said, taking off his tie. Stephen dialed the ambulance number, and 30 minutes later, a skinny blonde woman named Evelyn entered the house. She was about 30 years old, serious, thoughtful. She did a full examination and said it was probably poisoning. Well, I haven't even had anything to drink today or yesterday or eaten. I'm not talking about alcohol, I'm talking about drugs. What did you take? The woman in the white coat asked. Stephen thought about it. Yesterday, I had a headache. I took a pill. As usual, aspirin works well for me. That's all. I didn't take anything else. The symptoms are vague, not severe. I guess we'll just have to take some bandages. I'll give you the details in a minute. You'll be taking lots of activated charcoal and drinking salt water. If you want, we can take you to the hospital for a blood test and more information about your condition. Stephen had a panic attack about hospitals after Molly died. He wouldn't go anywhere near a clinic. After the birth, his wife was admitted to intensive care. Stephen was on duty in the hospital corridor for 24 hours until the doctor informed him of his wife's death. From that day on, Stephen developed phobias. He never even went to the hospital with his son. First, the nanny did, and then Christina. But she wasn't too happy about Christopher, so she often left it to the nanny too. Given that Christina did not work anywhere, she could well look after her husband's son herself, but she liked shopping and beauty salons more. She said right away that she wasn't going to become a typical housewife or mom on the grid. Don't go to the hospital. Stephen wrinkled his nose. While the patient went to the restroom, his son entered the room. "How's my daddy doing?" asked the boy. He had cubes in his hands. He sat down on the floor and began placing them one on top of the other. Evelyn took one of them in her hands and a memory from her childhood flashed through her mind. The exact same cubes her stepfather had made from solid basswood. She vividly remembered watching him work in the workshop. He himself had burned a drawing of the exact same pattern. Evelyn did not know her own father. Her mother refused to talk about him. Apparently there was nothing to say. When I was 5, my mother got together with a nice man named John. He was a widower, raised his son alone, and he was 9 at the time. Stepfather never hurt Evelyn, but they weren't exactly close either. He took care of his son. Liam had grown fond of his newfound brother. but he had his own interests and rarely spent time with them. Evelyn remembered very well how her stepfather had taught his son how to carve letters on pennies. They wouldn't let her go into the workshop, afraid the shavings might hurt her, but Evelyn sneaked in anyway and just watched. Did anyone still have the cubes? Carved by her? Why, it's handmade, quality stuff. Or maybe it's just the work of another craftsman. After finishing all the treatments on Stephen and making sure he was feeling better, Evelyn left many recommendations and left, but before that she could not resist and asked the patient, "And tell me, where did you get such a beauty?" Stephen smiled. His wife was out of the house at that time, talking loudly to someone on the phone. Evelyn thought she didn't care too much how her spouse felt, but rich people have their quirks after all. She realized at once that she was in a very expensive apartment with a magnificent view from all the windows at once. "Cubes," Stephen smiled. "I bought them from the road. I used to drive along the highway along the river to a business partner's house, and there was always a man in a wheelchair sitting there. One day I stopped and saw that he was selling their products for every taste and color. I used to be into wood carving myself, but I'm nowhere near him. I only bought the cubes. But to be honest, I wanted to take everything and the man himself to teach the fun," Stephen told me. His complexion had improved noticeably. Evelyn looked at him carefully. "I don't know what you've poisoned yourself with, but it looks very much like the effects of a number of medical drugs. And it's not aspirin. You be careful. Watch what you eat. It's not food poisoning, okay? I'd really like you to go to the hospital and get a blood test. Not just any hospital," Stephen pleaded. Evelyn smiled. "Well, then be very careful about your choice of food and drink." She didn't know how else to tactfully hint that perhaps someone was deliberately trying to poison him or make him sick. In the world of the rich, such things were not uncommon. Of course, Evelyn couldn't say that without saying so. But it was one possibility. It had to be gently voiced to the client. "I hear you. Thank you," nodded Stephen. Evelyn breathed a sigh of relief and walked out of his luxurious apartment. She rode in the ambulance. The driver was silent. The rain was pouring outside the window. It had started earlier today. For many days in a row, the rain in their city had started toward evening, when it was already dark, and it rained all night until morning. Today it was especially heavy. Evelyn rushed through the city, thinking she was returning to an empty apartment again. Since the divorce, her life had been a living hell. The nightmares started. She was afraid to be alone in an empty apartment. It was a childhood fear she couldn't get over. She was married, and the marriage seemed happy. A colleague at work is a surgeon from another hospital. He was called in when the hospital was completely out of surgeons. Kevin was transferred temporarily, and he immediately broke the hearts of all the young nurses and single women in general. Evelyn liked him too, but she kept to herself. The first few years of work were hard. Patients screamed and wrote complaints. Evelyn wrote a letter of resignation 3 times and 3 times. The head doctor, Jenna, ripped it to shreds. "You're a good doctor. You need to get used to it." I can't take it anymore." Evelyn cried. "What do you think? We're all working with knowledge. You're going to get a thank you note." "No, sweetie. Patients die in the chair. Dentists can be mean, stupid, inadequate. We work with everyone. Everybody's not just people. They're what you get. It's normal. They should have explained that in medical school. Now throw cold water on your face and go to work. Don't worry about the complaints. I can see it's not your fault. You can tear up a complaint, but I had a patient who said that to me. She yelled at me in front of my coworkers and other patients. How can you do that?" Each time, Evelyn gathered her courage and went back to her office to work. When she met the wheelchair user, she was different. She found the challenges easier. She knew that in the evening the best man in the world would meet her and they would go for a walk. And she would forget everything in the world in his arms. She married Kevin, and the couple lived together for 5 years. The first few years were happy, but then Evelyn began to notice the lipstick on his shirt collar. "The smell of women's perfume from her husband's clothes is my nurse," Kevin justified. He went back to his clinic, and they worked at different places again. And the lipstick marks. "That's me too. I told you it was gravy, must have gotten on it." "It's not lipstick." Kevin was angry. "I smell the same perfume on your clothes every day," Evelyn yelled. She sensed he was cheating on her before she even saw the signs, "because my nurse uses her perfume every day." Imagine, Evelyn stopped arguing. She just showed up at his office one day. Reception hours were already over. The hospital was almost empty. She quietly went up to the surgery and opened Evelyn's office door. "I'll explain everything in a moment." Kevin was frightened. His wife caught him with his mistress right on his desk. There was an argument. Dishes were broken. Loud words were said. But they didn't break up. And now Evelyn realized that they should have ended it all at once. They lived together for another year and a half. Then there was a different smell from her husband's shirts. She turned paranoid, started following him, found his second cell phone, and read his correspondence with his new mistress. This time it was an older woman, also a therapist. Evelyn filed for divorce, and Kevin silently packed his things and left her apartment. It felt empty without him. At first, she reached out to him, and he reached out to her. Kevin would come over when Evelyn called him at night in tears. He was longing too. But after spending the night together for the morning, they realized they couldn't be together. He doesn't know how to be faithful. She would never trust him again. For another 6 months after the divorce, Kevin visited his ex-wife. They were hesitant to let go of each other. The final breakup was painful and difficult, but it took place a year ago. All that year, Evelyn had been recovering, trying to keep an open mind. Even went on one date, but something inside broke. Now she felt alone all the time. And Kevin remarried. He got some sister pregnant and dragged him into the marriage. Kevin called Evelyn the night before the wedding. He was drunk, confessed his love, said he was only getting married because he wanted to be married, said he missed her and was looking for a replacement. He's trying to fall out of love, but he can't. Evelyn, on the other hand, was already breathing evenly. She wished him happiness and changed her phone number, but she couldn't find someone for herself. It also hurt that Kevin kept saying he didn't want children. Evelyn was infertile. She found out when she was young. She was afraid that no one would want someone with a defect, but Kevin immediately said it was even better. He categorically did not want to have children, and the subject had not even come up in their family. They agreed that if they wanted a child, they would get one from the orphanage, and they forgot about this topic once and for all. Evelyn had long since accepted the diagnosis. Kevin, on the other hand, was happy about it. "You could have been discreet, and there's a child with another woman." And Kevin didn't run away screaming. He decided to get married. He probably wanted a child after all. He just didn't realize it. Memories of the failed marriage were replaced by memories of Cuba as they stood before her eyes. She wanted to go down that road and look for that man. What if he was her stepfather? She remembered only good things about him and did not understand why her mother left him. They lived together for 2 years. Evelyn's half-brother David took her to school in the 1st grade, protected her, and even saved her life. Evelyn, having learned to swim, swam far away, and he rushed after her and managed to get there in time. The girl's leg got stuck in the road, and she began to drown. David then pulled her out of the water in a yucca towel and carried her in his arms all the way home. He must have been something like a first crush for Evelyn. She was only 8 at the time. It was silly, of course, but Evelyn adored him. When they packed up and left, she walked over to David and hugged him tightly. "Will you come and visit me?" she asked. "Of course," he replied. He also hugged her goodbye. Evelyn never saw her stepfather or stepbrother again. Her mother didn't say much about the reason for the separation. There had been some kind of quarrel. It was unclear what had happened. Evelyn only knew that her stepfather and David had left the country for a while. They were staying with relatives in Latvia. Then they seemed to come back. Evelyn was an adult when she tried to make inquiries. She found out through acquaintances that a man with that name and surname had been killed in an accident. He and his adult son were killed. Evelyn never found a grave. They said the bodies had been taken overseas. Evelyn realized it was about her stepfather and David. The age and the fact that they were buried in their homeland, she mourned them both. And her mother, upon hearing the news, just shrugged her shoulders. The next day was a day off for Evelyn. She got into her tattered seven and drove to the highway. The sun was shining. The puddles dried up before her eyes. Autumn was just gaining momentum, scattering yellow leaves. She felt wonderful. Evelyn was enjoying the ride and still had those cubes in front of her eyes. She drove for about half an hour before she saw a man in a wheelchair by the highway. Her heart beat faster. She pulled up and gasped. It was him, her stepfather. Evelyn jumped out of the car and rushed over to hug the man. Evelyn, Evelyn, is that you? My God, what a Mahala you are. A real bride. An elderly man with 2 shoulder-length hairs laughed huskily. He was neatly dressed, but his clothes were clearly old. A worn plaid shirt, old jeans, boots. What happened to you? Why are you in a stroller? Where'd you go? I've been looking for you and David, but no luck. He stroked Evelyn's hair. I wondered how he recognized her. He'd seen her so young. As if reading her thoughts, he reached out. Do you look like your mother, Evelyn? They got to talking. John told her how he had been injured. He had actually been in a truck accident. After separating from his mother, Irina, he became a trucker. There was a terrible accident. Another truck drove into him at high speed. Head-on collision. And he survived. Only he was in a different uniform. Father and son both died. Evelyn didn't find out by accident. She was just given the wrong information. After the accident, she needed surgery. There was no money for it. David was an adult and working. He took several jobs to earn his father money for the surgery. He wasn't a longshoreman. He guarded the warehouse at night. David was framed. There was a robbery at the warehouse. He was beaten up and expensive equipment, worth a huge amount of money, was taken away. It didn't take long to find the culprit. They pinned it all on David. He was accused of conspiring with the criminals and put in jail. John was left alone, adapted to life in a wheelchair, learned to do things on his own, even drove himself to the track here. He lived on the outskirts of town and got there by wheelchair. He sold woodwork he made himself for an hour. He also repaired watches and various appliances. The locals brought everything to his house and he fixed it for a symbolic fee. He sent the money to his son in prison so he wouldn't starve to death. Life behind bars is not sugar. It was very hard for David there. He was in his 2nd year. Evelyn almost cried when she heard about it. I'm divorced. I live alone. Why don't I take you in and look after you? We wouldn't be bored. More than you. Our surgeons will take a look. Maybe they can help. Peter shook his head. No, I love my home and I'm not going anywhere from it. I'm sorry, my daughter. How does your mom live? His stepfather asked, and there was a twinkle in his eye. Evelyn realized that he still remembered her, and he probably still had some feelings for Mom. Mom lives well across town in the same old house. Loves him, doesn't want to go anywhere. She's retired, goes to a literary knitting circle. John nodded. Give her my regards. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. It was a stupid breakup. I never found anyone after her. She's married, I suppose. No, she was always alone after you too. There was only one caretaker. She compared him to you all the time. I really missed you and David when you left. I don't think you should have split up. John shrugged. I'm not the one who decided your mom. It's both of our fault, of course, and it's my fault. Let's not dwell on the past. You better tell me how things are going at work. We talked for another hour. Then Evelyn went home, taking her stepfather's phone number. They hadn't been particularly close then, growing up. But Evelyn loved John as if he were her own father. And that fondness has remained with her to this day. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Tamor, how unfairly fate had treated him. There's no one to help her. She must do something. We have to help him get back on his feet. Why? That's what family's for. It doesn't matter what the bloodline is. It doesn't matter how long it's been since they've seen each other. Evelyn felt they were her family. First thing she did was visit the company where the robbery happened. Good afternoon. I'm a reporter from the local paper. She lied. Can I ask you a couple questions about the robbery that happened here? Introducing herself as a doctor from the local health center. Especially as a relative of a convict, she couldn't. Hardly anyone would talk to her. There was a new guard here, a quiet new guy. You know what's in a quiet pool. Let the robbers in at night and help them. They beat him up for appearances, of course. But he still couldn't fool anyone. Didn't give up his partners. Now he's sitting on his own. I guess he got paid well for his time in prison. The company took a huge loss. Fortunately, everything was insured. Our boss felt it. He took out insurance a month before the robbery, so he made a profit. Evelyn raised her eyebrows. That's a twist. So the owner felt it. What a telepath. And it wasn't hard to set up the new guard. Isn't the owner a crook? He robbed the place to get insurance. Probably sold the stolen goods and got the insurance money. And an innocent man is in jail for a second year. With these thoughts, Evelyn was leaving the building, and suddenly a couple came out of one door right in front of her. The girl was slender and wearing heels. She was laughing, and the man in the suit kept hugging and kissing her. Evelyn stopped. She didn't want anyone to see her there, but when the girl turned around, Evelyn saw her. It was her patient's wife, that gorgeous brunette. But what was she doing here? Apparently, it was the owner of the firm, and she was his mistress's. That's a twist. Passing by the office from which the couple had exited, Evelyn saw the sign Director Ethan. So she's dating the director. It would be good to find out how Stephen was doing. Was he alive? There were so many questions running through her head. Evelyn wanted to take a vacation to sort it all out. She came to work the next day in a bad mood. She wanted to go to the prison to see David. She wanted to visit John again. Young kid, still going strong. They say he's rich. I heard from the study. Evelyn entered and found her colleagues discussing a new patient. Oh, that's the patient I wanted to ask about. We were told you were on call with him the other day. A young guy with poisoning. Evelyn sat down on the couch. What happened? She asked, worried for him as if he were her own. She remembered his eyes, his smile, and the way he talked about the cubes. We can't understand anything. He was brought in at night unconscious. Now the coma doctors can't find anything good on him. Maybe he'll pull through, maybe he won't. He's poisoned. He showed signs even then, like someone gave him poison on purpose. He needs to detoxify. Evelyn responded, doesn't look like poisoning. Lungs are fine. But his heart is his heart. He's poisoned. How's his heart supposed to work? I said it was poisoning from poison. Not shawarma or expired shawarma. It's poison. It's silent, but the signs were there, pupils, skin, all the symptoms. The doctor stared at Evelyn with incomprehension. What are you so worried about? Are you not related to him or do you like him? The chief of surgery asked her. Evelyn shook her head and rushed to the head doctor. Ali Ibragimov, she was there in her office. Evelyn explained the situation. Why, your opinion was not listened to. The woman asked her. Evelyn shrugged her shoulders. If we wait until they are not listened to or when they are drinking tea, he will die. And he has a small son and a wife who cheats on him. The head doctor had always been kind to Evelyn. They walked together into the room where Stephen was lying. She checked the vitals, examined the patient, and ordered detoxification. Gave the nurse a directive. If the doctor on duty asks, tell him I ordered it, she told the nurse. She immediately started the IVs, and Evelyn breathed a sigh of relief. She was sure that this therapy would help. All that was left was to wait. Toward evening, when Evelyn returned from another call, she was informed that her advice had helped and the patient had regained consciousness, except that his condition remained extremely serious. The tests came back and a powerful poison was indeed found in his blood. It was impossible to find it just like that. The substance was prescription, and not all pharmacies sold it. It had no flavor at all, but its ingestion could kill a person if overdosed. Apparently, those who wanted to poison Stephen added it a little at a time. The end result would have been heart or liver failure. Evelyn got into her car and drove to a familiar house. She rang the doorbell, not yet knowing what she would say or why she was there. Christina opened the door. "What do you want?" she asked haughtily. Evelyn was confused. She was more worried about the child than anything else. She had thought she would get good news from the hospital, but she had never gotten through to her. Evelyn didn't quite know if her husband even cared. I came to see you because I was recently on a call, and now your husband has been admitted to our hospital. What's wrong with him? Christina asked. Evelyn remembered how the pretty woman was coming out of the principal's office, hugging another man. He's alive, he's better, but his condition is serious. Christopher came running out from behind Christina. Did you bring Dad? He asked, clutching Evelyn's arm. She smiled at the baby no. But I came to tell him he's okay. I'm sorry, I was just worried. Evelyn smiled at the lady of the house. The doctors didn't get through to you? I was on my way, so I thought I'd stop by to tell you the good news. He's out of the coma. It's too early to tell, but my colleagues say he'll pull through. Let's hope for the best. You can call the hospital and the doctors will tell you everything. Christina sighed and pressed her lips together. Thanks for stopping by. I just took a sedative, got overexcited, and slept all day. She lied. Evelyn nodded. So much for wanting to say that she'd seen where exactly nervous this particular one was and with whom. And if she had a drink, it certainly wasn't a sedative. Christina, go inside. I'll talk to the doctor myself. Businesslike, said the child Liam. Eyebrows. The son calls him by his first name. Modern. She gave it out. I'm not her son, she's my stepmother, said Christopher. Tell me about Daddy. I need to know when I can visit him again. For such a little boy. He reasoned and spoke too maturely. Liam once again told the child that Daddy was slowly coming around. What's the reason? What's wrong with Stephen? Asked Christina, still standing in the doorway. We don't know, lied Evelyn. I see. Thank you for your concern. I'll call the hospital myself tomorrow. So she said, making it clear that it was time for the uninvited guests to leave. Evelyn smiled, said goodbye to everyone, and left. All the way home, she berated herself for being emotional. Why had she come? What had she wanted to accomplish with this, and what had she accomplished? Except to learn that this Christina is not Christopher's mother, and the child of her 5 years clearly understands that. 2 days later, after working her shift, Evelyn went to David's house. They had a heart-to-heart talk. The boy was very happy to see her, but he didn't look well. David had gotten pneumonia in prison, and it seemed to Evelyn that he was a little undertreated. There was still a cough, shortness of breath. He needed vitamins, breathing exercises, and no drafts. David was sick every now and then. Evelyn talked to him, and she felt better. She called him brother. She said she would try to get the case reviewed. But what was more important to David was that she believed in him, believed in his innocence. And now he felt better about his father. The nurse is an EMT. Yeah, that's a real gift. They discussed John's injury, and Evelyn promised to look into it. When she got to work, the first thing she did was visit Stephen. He had regained consciousness, but was having trouble speaking. How are you feeling? Evelyn asked. Stephen looked at her with a smile that was not without difficulty. He was pale. His eyes were narrowed, there was swelling. Well, I was told you saved me, he said. Evelyn took his hand to support him. She highly doubted anyone else would. Christina called to check on her husband's condition, but never bothered to come. I just realized that with you before anyone else, it was poisoning. Do you know who might have had access to your food? Maybe a competitor? Stephen shook his head. No one. I had competitors, but I beat them all. He cracked a smile. Sounds like an excuse to get you out of the way, Evelyn remarked. I don't believe anyone could do that. There must have been something in the food. Chemicals. I'll tell you as a medical professional, it's not food. It's food laced with a rare poison. It's used to treat seriously ill people in small doses. It causes euphoria, dizziness in large amounts, poisoning, and asphyxiation. Accumulated in the body in large doses, it can cause organ failure. Think about it. Who would do that? No one. I don't believe any of my loved ones or partners or even competitors would do such a thing. Evelyn sighed. It was about time she told you what she'd seen. Who are your competitors? She asked. Yes, all the local food manufacturers. Evelyn could barely restrain herself from giving away her version of events. But Stephen raised his own pulse. She saw it on the monitor and immediately changed the subject. Liam had given Stephen a detailed account of his condition, and he listened and thanked her. She also thanked him for helping her find her stepfather. Stephen was happy for her. His eyes lit up. After her pulse returned to normal, she left. Had to get back to the workplace. There was just about to be a call. All day she'd been trying to force herself to stop prying. But she couldn't overpower her desire for justice. She understood what drove her. She had liked Stephen from the first day she had come to call on him. He seemed sweet, kind, and he spoke so fervently about the cubes. Something about him had caught on. And then there was his little son. She was sure they had a strong family, and forced herself to put all her thoughts out of her head. It's not a girl who falls in love with a patient, just like that in half an hour, and at 30 years old. But when things got this bad, she just couldn't stay away. What else could she do? Of course, Evelyn found out where the drug that poisoned Stephen was sold, and the next day she went to the pharmacy. I'm sorry, I can't give you that information. What patients are treated with constitutes doctor-patient confidentiality. Evelyn sighed. You see, I'm a medical professional myself. A patient of mine has been poisoned, and I want to help him. The pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with glasses, replied, You'll find out. You have what to do next. You have no rights or authority. Let your patient go to the authorities, and I will help find the criminal. Show all the notebooks, all the records, but only when I see the appropriate document. It's been a week. Stephen's condition stabilized. Evelyn visited him every day because Stephen had made it a habit to take her hand. Did he do it for personal reasons? Or maybe he took all the doctor's hands? Evelyn didn't know. But his touch made the ground fall away from under her feet. They grew closer, began to talk about personal topics. That day, Evelyn wanted to tell Stephen about her suspicions, but didn't dare, because he met her in the room with sadness in his eyes. What's wrong? She asked. Stephen always smiled, even when he could hardly speak for breath. And here, when he had already been moved to a regular room from the intensive care unit, when his liver was back to normal and his blood counts were improving rapidly, suddenly there was nothing on his face. Everything was fine. Stephen turned away to the window and brushed away a tear. You can tell me, I'll help. Evelyn lowered herself habitually to the edge of his bed. Stephen looked at her, tears in his eyes. It's okay, really. I miss my son very much. Christina brought him to me today, and I realized that he's not doing very well there without me. I need to be there with them. She's not watching him at all, and I kicked the nanny to hell. He and Christina drink wine together at night. Christopher's out there alone, hungry, cold. I'd kill those bastards. What kind of people are these? Evelyn was astonished to hear that. Stephen, I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. Forgive me for saying this. I saw your Christina and company coming out of his office. Apparently, they were hugging and laughing and kissing. I thought they were having an affair, and if they were, she was the only one who could have poisoned you. Stephen raised his eyebrows. Yeah, well, they hardly know each other. I introduced them myself 2 years ago. He's been brooding ever since. I'm sorry, I know it hurts to hear that. My husband cheated on me too, and more than once. That's why we split up. Stephen shook his head. You must have seen my Christina and that old man. But he's got gray hair, he's full on with a bowdy. And he has a very and laugh. If he does. I wasn't imagining it, because I saw your wife clearly with my own eyes. What were you even doing there? Were you following her? Stephen blurted out. Evelyn got out of bed. Who needs your wife? Yours put my half-brother in jail. I figure he was getting his insurance money, pulling fake robberies. How my brother became the scapegoat. Stephen shook his head. You're either lying or you're wrong. I know Christina. She can be selfish, hurtful. She's a bad mother, but she's not a traitor or a murderer. That's not in her. She's good inside at heart. Evelyn didn't know what else to add. She told the truth, and she was almost accused of snooping. What on earth was she thinking? She just turned around and headed for the door. Evelyn, wait, she heard behind her and turned around. If you don't mind, get Christopher and a toy. He left it at my place today. He won't be able to sleep without it. He's alone in there. And then there's the mascot. No mascots. Evelyn walked over to Stephen and took a medium-sized bear from his hands. His name is Baloo. I won him for Christopher at the park a year ago. He hasn't parted with him since. talks to him, tells him secrets. It's more than a toy. That's his friend Evelyn smiling. How cool is he? She took the bear and promised to stop by his house. Really, she didn't feel like doing that at all. Dating herself again. Even though Stephen naively believes in her non-involvement in the poisoning, because he will come home and she will finish what she started. What to do? Evelyn puzzled over this question on the way to his house. A cool fall rain beat against the window. Her slender fingers hammered the steering wheel of an old 7, and a stuffed toy lay on the seat next to her. Evelyn rang the doorbell. No one opened it for a long time. She already thought that no one was home. But soon Christina opened the door. She was wearing makeup, so beautiful that Evelyn felt jealousy coupled with a sense of her own insignificance. "What do you want?" Christina asked. She had no respect for unauthorized guests. "Sorry to bother you, I brought Christopher's toy. He left it at the hospital." Stephen asked me at that moment. A crying boy appeared from the room. "You came and got it. Thank you, thank you. Let's go. I'll show you the little house I built for him." Christopher forcefully dragged Evelyn into the house and took her to her room. Christina was clearly not happy about this, but let her guest in. All the while Baby was telling Evelyn the story of building a fortress out of toys, Christina stood in the doorway with her lips pressed together in displeasure. "I'm sorry, I'm going to leave now." Evelyn smiled, listening intently to the child. He really was lonely as hell in this house. Since he dragged an aunt he didn't know very well into his bedroom. "So you're picking a wedge with my husband?" Christina asked. Evelyn shuddered. It was true. She was madly in love with Stephen. She angrily colored and shook her head. "What are you? I'm just a doctor. Helping him." "Oh, take your time. I can see it's all over your face," Christina said rudely. At that moment, a message arrived on Evelyn's phone. She opened it and thought that maybe it was her time to play detective. As with all modern smartphone gadgets, Evelyn had an audio recording function voice recorder. Evelyn turned it on discreetly and tucked the phone into her pocket. "I apologize if it sounded like that to you." She started, "Shove your, excuse me, you know where. I don't care about Stephen. I'd be happy to see him quack. So you poisoned him?" Evelyn asked bluntly. Christina flashed her eyes. "What wouldn't you do for someone you love?" She said. "Don't be glad he didn't die. It doesn't change anything. He'll be bankrupt soon anyway. Then you can have him with all his guts, and he's all yours. In the meantime, get out of my apartment and get in the trough and get the hell out of here." Christina didn't listen to her whims. "This is my and Daddy's house, too." Christopher turned his attention away from his teddy bear and began to defend Evelyn. "I'm sorry, it's time," she said tactfully. She was scared to be there. Christina had actually confessed to the crime by getting into the car. Evelyn checked the tape recorder. It was very clear, and it might not be enough to prove anything in court, but it would be enough to open Stephen's eyes to his precious wife. Evelyn didn't go home. She turned the car around and headed for the hospital. Within half an hour, she was already sitting on the bed with Stephen with the recorder on, and he was habitually holding her hand. "I can't believe it. That's her voice and my Christopher's voice." That's what she said. "It's true. And what you said about Limonov," Evelyn nodded. Stephen got out of bed and began to pace around the room. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. It's impossible to believe. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news." He walked over to her and hugged her. Evelyn was surprised, discouraged by his touch. "Thank you, a complete stranger. This is the third time you've saved my life. The first time was when you came to me, the second when you realized what was wrong with me before anyone else. And the third is now. Today, and I'm a fool, I didn't even want to believe you. God sent you to me." Evelyn smiled sadly. "He sent me to destroy your family. I didn't want to. Christina asked me bluntly, would you like it if I followed you? I felt so ashamed." Stephen looked into her eyes. "Do you like me?" The question came out of the blue, and what should he answer? Her mind raced so fast that Evelyn didn't have time to orient herself. She nodded affirmatively and gave a clear one. "No," Stephen laughed. "God, you're an angel. I'm just not ready right now, you know. 20 minutes ago I was happily married, and now it turns out it was all just in my head." Evelyn felt awkward again, like she wanted to justify herself. I like you as a person. Don't get any ideas. It's just that you're funny and I'm kind and I help everyone. Saving people. That's my job. Evelyn blushed, embarrassed, and was about to leave. Suddenly, Stephen came up to her and kissed her. It was a little awkward, unexpected, but eerily pleasant. You weren't ready. Just then, Stephen shrugged, already ready. Evelyn had never thought it possible that she would be lucky enough to fall in love all over again and experience this incredible feeling. First, Evelyn got herself under control. I have to go home and you have to rest. Will you come tomorrow? He asked, still not letting go of her hand. Yes, she answered timidly. Everything was different. In a matter of minutes, everything had turned upside down. Evelyn drove home, and the smile never left her face. As she fell asleep, she remembered his kisses. Where would this all lead? Would they get along? There were more questions than answers. That night, she went to sleep happy. The next day, Evelyn arrived at the hospital in a completely different mood. She had the same challenging day ahead of her on calls with patients. But in the morning, she ran into Stephen's room. She wondered if his kiss was spontaneous, or if he was just taking pity on her, or if it was gratitude. But on entering, she was convinced otherwise. Stephen immediately broke into a smile, got out of bed, and put his arms around her. They kissed until the footsteps in the hallway that threatened to expose them. Stephen eased himself down onto the bed, and Evelyn took a step back as a sleepy and tired nurse entered the room. Breakfast is ready for you today. You may proceed to the dining room. Your tests are good, and if they are the same tomorrow, you will be released, she said. Toward evening, Liam asked to leave her shift. She had arranged it in advance and went to her stepfather's house. John was at home waiting for her. He knew that Evelyn would take him to her hospital. The chief surgeon had promised to see him there. They did an MRI, looked at the condition of the tissue on the ultrasound. John waited in the room while the surgeon and Evelyn discussed the possibility of surgery. It had to be done right away. Not many people would do it now. Why didn't he come in sooner? It just happened. Evelyn sighed. What were you looking at? Such a serious injury. He was your stepfather, he wondered. Strict doctor. I haven't seen him in years. I found him a while ago and brought him right over. It's a long story. Of course, if I'd known before, in that case you'd have to go to Moscow. They have equipment. I'll find out how much the operation costs. My cousin works there. He'll do it cheaper, but it'll still be a lot of money. Len, get ready. Maybe you'll need a loan. Evelyn was glad he didn't say no. The important thing was that it could be fixed. The rest is nothing. Liam drove John home, made sure he was all right, and only then went to the hospital. It was already dark when she approached the building. The guard greeted her to his resurrected man. Evelyn nodded. Everyone already knows that she runs to Stephen every now and then. Rumors would be flying around the hospital, and he checked out and was gone before noon. How dumbfounded was Evelyn? He left, wrote a waiver, and went home. The doctor gave him instructions on how to treat himself, what medication to take. He was in a great hurry. Evelyn suddenly realized that she didn't even know his phone number. And he had just left. He could have her phone number if he wanted it. She got in her car and headed home. Of course, why would he want her? Maybe something had happened though, but he could have at least called or left a note. Maybe she's just not as important to him as she'd like. No, she certainly wouldn't run after him, stalking him and looking for an excuse to meet again upset. She parked her car, slamming the door loudly. Otherwise, her Kalima wouldn't close. She arrived at the entrance of her lonely apartment and discerned a familiar silhouette in the darkness. Stephanie stood on the threshold with a luxurious bouquet of red roses. I've been waiting for you. I'm sorry I ran away. I couldn't just lie there any longer. I gave you tea, and I'll tell you all about it. She smiled and took from his hands a bouquet of flowers like she'd never been given before. They were just gorgeous. Evelyn and Stephen went upstairs to her apartment. She heated up some vegetable ragu because she hadn't eaten all day. They had dinner. Stephen explained why he had run away and how he had spent the day. When the nurse said my tests were good, I realized there was no point in lying there anymore. I signed out, wrote a waiver, and went home. I couldn't wait to see my son. He was at daycare, which was for the best. I didn't want him to hear me and Christina talking. We had a fight. I told her what I thought, and she denied it. But when she asked if you'd said all that, she gave herself away. I played her that tape you sent me, and she bit her tongue and started packing. I told her I'd be back in 200, and I wanted her out of my house by then. I went to pick up Christopher, picked him up from daycare, and spent time with him at the park. We rode the carousel, ate ice cream, got back in the evening, and Christina was gone. I calculated her babysitter. She was Christina's friend. I didn't like the way she worked. I also stopped by the office later with Christopher, and it turned out that Christina had gone behind my back to do her business there and leaked important information from me. She confessed to me that she was dating him, which I could still understand, but she almost poisoned me for money. What kind of person is she? Evelyn shrugged. How did Christopher react when you and Christina divorced? I've never seen him so happy. Wow, how did I not realize she was a monster? Even a 5-year-old could see that. I guess I'm too naive. My parents think so too. But you're kind and honest. Evelyn took his hand. Stephen's eyes sparkled. I wish I could stay with you, but I can't. The neighbor is looking after Christopher. Why don't we go to my place? Christopher, will you stay with us? He has to get used to us being together. Evelyn smiled. Are we together? She asked. How tired she was of the doubts of uncertainty. Of course there are objections. Evelyn shook her head. At last, there was something good, something light, something real in her life. I'd like to, really, but I'd rather not tonight. All my things are here in the morning. I have to be at work. I don't want to wake you, Christopher. I'm a very early riser. That's because you live in the middle of nowhere. Stephen blurted out. Evelyn laughed. They stayed together for another half hour, most of which Stephen tried to force himself to leave. But he couldn't stop kissing Evelyn. They felt like teenagers. Their heads were spinning with emotion. Evelyn said she would come to Stephen when the spirit of Christina had weathered in his apartment. It didn't seem right to her to come to his house on the same day his wife left it. The next day, Stephen filed a police report. Evelyn was pulled from work to give a statement. They spent 2 o'clock at the station. Liam told about the poisoning, showed the results of the tests that confirmed it. Stephen attached Christina's leak information to a competitor. On the same day, police officers, inspired by the generous monetary donations, Stephen found a pharmacy in which Christina personally bought those drugs on a typical prescription of the doctor who prescribed it, also brought to responsibility. Upon learning that Stephen was being sued, Christina went to his home. Evelyn was there, playing dice with Christopher. You were quick to replace me. That creep has been grooming you since day one. Christina was furious. Stephen folded his arms across his chest and looked at her questioningly. What did you want? How dare you sue me? I'll put you in jail for slander. You don't know what that will do to you. You almost killed me. And you didn't leave Christopher an orphan. And you're gonna be responsible for that. I guess you thought if I was nice, you could wipe your feet on me. You know, I accepted your betrayal and your treachery, but you tried to poison me. I loved you. You were my family. Christina, flashing her eyes. You can't prove anything. She already proved it. You didn't have to buy those drugs yourself. I wonder if Ethan will be drying breadcrumbs, carrying parcels to the prison. Christina changed from anger to mercy. She suddenly started crying. You can't do this to me. Please take the statement. Please at least don't accuse me of poisoning you. Yes, I made a mistake, but that's all, Ethan. He made me say so in court, and they can figure out who made who, answered Stephen. Christina realized that tears didn't work either. She glared angrily and stormed out of the apartment with the phrase, I wish you were dead. Stephen was dealing with the court, rebuilding cases after Christina had stuck her nose in there. He had to fire an employee who was leaking her information. Turns out she was dating him too. Stephen didn't go to the police about it, but he did tell his employee to tell the police about it. Let him know who he has warmed on his chest. When Ethan found out about his lover's infidelity, he immediately broke up with her, and Christina went to the police and accused him of everything, said he was the one who made her poison her husband, spying for his firm. Ethan was also being prosecuted. While doing all this, Stephen almost overlooked an important detail. Evelyn secretly wanted to take out a loan. He'd seen the paperwork on her desk while she was in the shower. "What are these?" he asked. "My stepfather. I told you he needed surgery. I got approved for a loan. It's a little less than I need. I'll try another bank. He's my family. I won't leave him in a wheelchair if there's any hope." If David hadn't been set up, he'd be walking on his own 2 feet by now. The sooner the better. "My God, Evelyn, why didn't you ask? You know I'm not poor. I can't do this. This is my problem. My wife poisoning me was my problem. Yet you stepped in and saved me so many times. And you want to pay for it with money." Stephen was confused. He fell silent. "I don't want your money. I'm not Christina." "Jesus, Evelyn, I didn't think so. I don't know anyone like Christina at all. She's unique in her greed and cruelty. But this is about a man's health. I can handle myself. Period." Stephen kept silent and never brought it up again. But the next day, he went to the hospital where Evelyn worked. She had mentioned that she had examined her stepfather. There he found a surgeon, and the surgeon told him what kind of surgery was needed, where it could be done, and how much it would cost. Stephen paid for everything the same day, arranged a date to bring the patient in, and went home. In the evening, Evelyn returned from her shift, and Christopher was not a step away from her. Stephen ordered dinner from the restaurant. "I asked you for tomorrow." "Seriously," he said. "We'll go to Moscow together with your stepfather. At the same time, you'll get to know him." What did Stephen tell her about the surgery? And only on the media to say thank you for that is not thankful. "We're family. Or am I misunderstanding something?" he asked. Evelyn looked at him seriously. "Would you like that? I live with you. We're together. But you're not even divorced yet. You need a new wife now. Do you want us to be a family, or is this just a flirtation? We're adults." Lennon didn't know. What exactly does Stephen want? Like all men, he wasn't a big fan of talking about these things. "I'm not a teenager just going out without a commitment. I have a son, in case you haven't noticed, who needs a mom. I've also always wanted a daughter," Stephen said. Evelyn didn't know how to talk about such a thing, so she quickly blurted out, "I'm infertile." Stephen raised his eyebrows and looked at her with surprise at being infertile. "I can't have children. You won't have a daughter by me." Evelyn sighed. She was prepared to see the disappointment in Stephen's eyes. "It doesn't matter. A daughter has IVF options. Not in my case." "Okay, don't get yourself worked up. I don't care about that. I care about you. I want you by my side. We'll figure out the baby thing somehow. We're a family. I'll marry you, I get it." He looked into her eyes, and Evelyn calmed down. His last sentence was all she wanted to hear. The surgery was a success. When Evelyn found out that she had taken John to Moscow, her mother began to call twice a day, even though they had called once a week before. Her mother was a complicated person. She wouldn't let anyone get close to her. Eventually, Evelyn got over it and just let her mother go. They lived each their own lives, like old acquaintances who occasionally check in with each other. "How's it going?" You know what Evelyn's mom said? "Take him to my place after the operation. He needs care, and I live alone. I'll help him, and then we'll see. He'll get back on his feet. And if he wants to, he can leave me again." Evelyn was surprised. "I guess Mom hasn't forgotten him. I'm sure he'll refuse. He's too shy, but he needs care. You say he's all alone. Then come and tell him yourself. John had a complicated operation and was in rehab in Moscow." Evelyn's mom packed her bags and came over. The meeting was touching. They both cried. They talked about life and decided that they had parted very stupidly. John agreed to go to his ex-wife and live with her until he could walk on his own. A lot of people were still not listening to him. He saw no progress, but the doctors said the surgery was successful and everything was going as it should. After Evelyn's stepfather and her mother began living together, Evelyn worked closely to free David. However, she was immediately denied a review of the case. But when Stephen stepped in with his connections and dirt on David, the case quickly went public. The case will be retried today. David served almost 2 years in prison. But did he do what he was convicted of? The case has taken an unexpected turn. New details have emerged. What "We'll keep an eye on developments," the reporter said on camera. Given that he was an accomplice in the poisoning case with Christina, and the prosecutor's office is actively interested in him. In small towns, they like to organize demonstrative floggings. They say, "We punish even the powerful for a crime. We work on conscience." Under such a flogging fell, and he was accused of fraud. It turned out that he had staged the robbery himself to get insurance. They also found the distribution points. They couldn't tie him to the poisoning case, but he got a suspended sentence for fraud. His company went completely bankrupt. Part of the money went to the insurance company, part to David for doing almost 2 years for someone else's crime. Christina, on the other hand, got a real sentence, given her no criminal record. And the fact that she pleaded guilty, as her lawyer had told her to do, she got 2 years in the penitentiary. David was happy. Evelyn immediately took over his treatment. Neglected bronchitis was a serious matter, especially since pneumonia was on the rise and new viruses were hitting the lungs. He was treated under the guidance of his half-sister. David lived alone in his father's house. Evelyn visited him every day. Stephen was even a little jealous, but he kept it carefully hidden. While David was being examined, he met Evelyn's friend, a young nurse named Cindy. They were 9 years apart in age, but all ages are conducive to love. Liam told Cindy that David was innocent, although he had been in prison, and had been cleared of all charges. He got a job at Stephen's firm. He helped the guy get a security guard's license and took him in. Cindy didn't see David as an ex-con. She saw him as a good guy who'd been through a lot of bad things. The relationship had been slow to develop, but David was happy. Meanwhile, Evelyn and Stephen decided to legalize their relationship. Christina refused to give him a divorce, but it was legally possible to divorce a prisoner without her consent. Therefore, as soon as Christina was locked up, Stephen quickly formalized the divorce proceedings and very originally proposed to Evelyn. She came home from work tired and exhausted and was met by Christopher. He was wearing a suit and tie. The baby said, "Will you be my mom?" he asked. Evelyn laughed, of course. She hugged him, and Christopher put a bagel on her thin finger. "I only have a ring like that," he said. Evelyn thought that Stephen was just trying on a new suit for Christopher, and that he was playing the groom. But at that moment, his father appeared from behind the boy. He was wearing exactly the same suit and tie. He was holding a bouquet of scarlet roses. He gave the flowers to Evelyn. "And if you have agreed to be my son's mom, I have to ask, will you take me into your happy family as a father?" To him, Evelyn nodded, barely holding back tears of joy. She didn't think anyone would ever propose to her in such a romantic way. Stephen put a real ring on her finger. "The day after tomorrow, I've already arranged it," he said. Evelyn laughed, "But how will we have time for everything?" "Let's go pay for it. I've already bought the suit, as you can see. The restaurant is booked, too. It'll just be our parents, David and his girlfriend, and a couple of my friends." Evelyn was over the moon to share her joy. She and Stephen immediately drove to her parents' house. Walking through the door, they were met by John on his own 2 feet. He was on the mend quickly in the capable hands of Evelyn's mother as she seated everyone at the table. Stephen and Evelyn looked at each other enigmatically. "We have a surprise for you," she said, and held out her hand with a ring. "Oh, this is great. Well done. We're happy for you," rejoiced Mom. "Congratulations, my daughter. We have just the same surprise for you," John said. Evelyn's mom modestly showed the ring on her hand. It was a simple silver one. It was the same as John's. "Have you decided to get married?" Evelyn glowed. "It's about time. I'm so happy for you." Their parents had applied the day before, so they were married a month later, as they should. Evelyn's wedding was beautiful. Stephen took care of all the organizational issues. There was a photo shoot, dancing, a boat trip, just the two of them. And in the evening, when the guests had dispersed and the newlyweds were finally alone, Stephen kissed his wife and asked her how she liked everything. "Were you sad?" "I was just nervous. So many emotions I've been through, I guess. I need to rest." "Yeah, we're flying on a honeymoon tomorrow. You'll get your strength back." "Yeah, that's right." But Evelyn's condition was getting worse and worse. They flew to London. Evelyn dreamed of going there, but on the 5th day she was admitted to the hospital with symptoms of poisoning. The doctor came out after the examination and said something to Stephen. Evelyn approached him as soon as the doctor left. "I don't understand anything. I had an A in English at school. I feel like they're speaking some other English." "Did he say it was something serious?" she asked. "Yes, very serious." Stephen looked anxiously into her eyes and sat her down on the couch. "Don't worry, we will examine you. Everything will be fine," he said. Evelyn's heart sank into her heels. She thought it must be oncology or something with her heart, as they took blood for tests. "What do they suspect?" she asked courageously, looking him in the eye. "They suspect you're pregnant. They need to do an ultrasound to confirm, but it's impossible. It must be some kind of abnormality. That's what happens when your hormones malfunction." Evelyn got up from her seat and paced back and forth down the hall. "I don't know. Well, the doctors say it's just pregnancy." An hour later, Evelyn was lying in the ultrasound, and Stephen was sitting next to her and holding her hand. The doctor was talking to him in English, and Evelyn was angry because she didn't understand anything she said. Evelyn was scared. She said, "You're in your 5th week." After returning from her trip, Evelyn went for a checkup. The doctors were all hands on deck. It happens. I guess it was meant to happen. 8 months later, Evelyn and Stephen had a daughter. They named her Lisa. It was a name Christopher liked very much. The doctors said that Evelyn could have as many children as she wanted. There were undoubtedly gynecological problems, but not as serious as she thought. It remained a mystery to her why she had not gotten pregnant with Kevin then. After all, they'd been together for 5 years. Walking with Lisa in the park one day, Evelyn met him. Kevin was walking with his new girlfriend. "Hi, I see you've decided to adopt after all," he said, smiling. His girlfriend smiled too. "No, I had a baby. This is my daughter," Lisa answered Evelyn proudly. Kevin's face changed. "But you couldn't have kids, could you?" "Turns out I could. How's your baby? Are you having a boy or a girl?" Evelyn wanted to keep the conversation going. "A boy, only if he's mine. I'm divorced now. My ex is demanding child support. And I say let them prove the baby's mine. There's a DNA test." Evelyn shrugged. "What's a test?" "The test says I'm the father, but it can be switched." Evelyn frowned. "No, you can't. I'm sure I'm just being played." "All right, let's not be sad. Why don't you give me your phone number? We can talk sometime." Evelyn was surprised by Evelyn. His girlfriend walks a few feet away to answer the phone, and he's already hitting on her. "I'm married, and you don't seem to be single either." "So what?" Evelyn shook her head and just walked away, leaving the stroller standing and staring after him. He didn't look happy and was still changing women like gloves. And how can you not trust a DNA test? Well, take another one somewhere else. It was more like he just didn't want to take responsibility. Responsibility isn't his thing, though. Evelyn left, and as she left, she felt like she put an end to their relationship. If earlier she still caught herself remembering the rut, now it was gone somehow. With Stephen in her life, she adored him, loved him with all her heart. Never before had she met such a kind and bright man. No wonder he'd fallen for Christina. Kindness is easier to use and manipulate. The goodness of it all was far behind her. And now Evelyn had found her true feminine happiness. Christopher started calling Evelyn Mom and asked her to give him a baby brother for his next birthday.